Good day, everyone. Scooter coming to you live from the Granville Guitars World Headquarters here in lovely St. Petersburg, Florida. Today is October the 9th, 2018. It's a Tuesday, and we're going to spend some time looking at and freshening up this very, very cool, old, and rather special Marshall 100 watt. So if this is something that interests you, stay tuned because we're going to talk about it. This particular one, let's zoom in on the head front here. This is a 1967 Super Lead, formerly owned by the maestro, Mr. Steve Howe of Yes and Asia. And as you can see, it's got the basket weave 100 watt cabinet with it, and also the road case for the cabinet has the Asia stencil on it. It's also been autographed on the back by Mr. Howe. I'm not going to show you that because it has the owner's name as part of the signature, and I want to kind of keep that just between me and him. So it's in excellent condition. Got a few modifications. As we zoom in on the front panel here a little bit, you'll notice that a master volume has been added down there, drilled through the JMP portion of the logo, and the indicator light is not stock. That's updated. One or the other of those switches, possibly both, have been changed out. So it's had some work done to it in its lifetime. Nothing real major, as we'll see when we look inside of it. I'm also going to show you the inside of this cabinet. It's a 68 100 cabinet, and it has 4 Celestion greenbacks in the back with no labels, as you would expect, because in those days they never expected anyone to open those cabinets, so they never had labels on the speakers at that particular time. So let's first have a look inside the speaker cabinet, shall we? Alright, as we can see, we're around back of the cabinet here. There is Mr. Howe's signature, and he's written regards on there to the owner. I've covered up the owner's name because frankly it's none of your business. You can see the back of the cabinet has had an awful lot of vinyl torn away, and it's been replaced with gaff tape, and that's been there for quite some time. So it was put there while Steve owned it, so we're going to leave it alone. We're looking at this as kind of a historic piece in a lot of ways because of that. It's kind of a curiosity because Steve was not really known as a Marshall guy. So, yeah, I've got the screws out. All the screws have been replaced. They're nice new galvanized steel screws that would not have come on this cabinet originally. The old ones are long gone. There is the jack plate, and the plate appears to be original. The jack possibly is original. We'll have a peek at it here in a second. All the hardware appears to be original. It's quite battered in terms of missing chrome and such, but anyways, let me get the baffle off here. Okay, here we are inside this beast, and as we can see, these are original Celestions of the right period. They're dated 1968. Let me see if I can zoom in on one of the date codes. Yeah, they're right up in here. They're all T1281 20HA. Yeah, T1281 20HA, which will date these speakers to 1968. There's no acoustic absorption material in here, as there sometimes was in some of these cabinets of this era. It's mentioned in the catalogs. There's a center post present. It looks like it's had some rubber added to the end of it. That may be original. I don't think it is, but it might be. But it has all the other construction attributes that you'd like to see in a cabinet of this age. The speakers may have been reconed. I wasn't able to find any codes visible from the exterior. I'd have to probably remove one to actually see where they might be. But as I was mentioning earlier, definitely greenbacks, and definitely went into a slant 412 because they have no labels and never have had labels. So that's typically what you would expect from that period. If we go down here, we can see the jack that's mounted in there. Could very well be original. Certainly old enough. Anyway, I've got the baffle open and supported with a stool here, so you can kind of see the back of this thing. But it tests to the correct impedance. All 4 speakers work, and later on in this video we're going to see what it sounds like. But there you go, there's the inside of this cab. Well, I thought I'd whip this thing around to the front and give you a little better lit view of the front of the amp. As we can see, there's one little hole up top here. Not sure what caused that one, but this is real so-called cane grill. Very heavy weave, really good stuff, and it's in excellent shape. It's got, you know, some staining. It's actually got more staining than it doesn't here and there. We see the 100 logo is in place in here. Trim looks pretty good around the grill itself. The seams are alright, and they're exactly what we would expect. The gold striping has faded to, you know, more of a bronze color, and some of it is missing in places. Your handles on both sides, I'm pretty sure these are original because there's just a ton of pitting and chrome that's missing. The screws may not be. It's kind of hard to tell, but yeah, it's a great old cabinet. These were built. There's a reason why they're sought after. They were built very well, and built to last, and built to take the punishment. In my considered opinion, Marshall cabinets are still the best sounding cabinets in just about every situation that you may come across. You know, all your other tube amps that are out there almost always come to life once plugged into a Marshall cabinet. Really not sure why that is. Don't really have to know. All I know is that everything I plug into my own Marshall cabinet always sounds a little better. So there's a front view of the cabinet. Let's have a look around inside this 1967 Super Lead head here. Okay, here we are around back of this 1967 Marshall Super Lead 100. And we can see that one of Mr. Howe's technicians at some point added some white gaff tape, and there's some spray painted squares, circles, etc. With a number 4 written. Those are not circles, obviously. Hang on a sec, I was distracted. Next to that, we have the white plate, as we would expect, of the era. Marshall Products Limited. That's correct for the time. Brass brad mounting that on there. If we go down further and look at the panel some, we go over here to the far left. There's a service label. Can't make all of it out, but it does have a date of 19th of July 1990. And during this particular period, 1990, Mr. Howe would have mostly been doing solo things, I think. This is just off the top of my head. Asia was not part of his life at that point, and he was not in Yes at that particular point. So yeah, this just got some work done on it in the interim, I guess you'd say. Come across here in the usual attributes to the chassis you'd want to see. Serial number is SL, but I've obscured it. Output jacks, the old school output and main selectors, as you would expect of that era. The cable input and fuse holders. All right, let's go inside, shall we? All right, we've got the chassis out and having a look at the inside here. As you can see, we've got a quartet of Siemens EL34s. At least one of them, two of them. These two here are marked CVC Premium, but those are definitely Siemens make. And those are excellent 34s. There's no question about those. Preamp and phase inverter tube shields are in place. We're going to remove those. And looks like, well, let's start with V1 here. V1 is an Electro-Harmonix, Russian make. V2 is, it looks like an RCA. It's got quite a long gray plate. There's really not enough of the old silk screening to see. It does have some numbers that were written on it with paint marker. We'll be testing all of these, of course. And V3, the phase inverter tube or driver tube, is also a Russian make Electro-Harmonix. So we've got some good tubes here. Assuming they're good, we'll test them and obviously fire up the amp to see. Let's have a look at these transformers. They're all around the same time period, so I think there's no questioning whether they're original or not. You can see your code there and there, and then the choke right there. And yeah, these are at least original of the period, if not to the amplifier. So yeah. Oh yeah, the tube label. I'm sorry, I knew there was something else I wanted to show you over here. Here's the old tube label. Not much on it anymore. You can see some initials for the assembly. This person was EB, is what it looks like. And the tag board was assembled by somebody named Mary, or it could be Harry. I think it's Mary. That looks like an M to me. You also see here a spot where a tube, get the camera to go down there, a spot where a tube could have been put but was not. Was that a mod? I don't know. It looks pretty old. You can see where I wiped away a bit of the grime from around some of the tubes. We're going to wipe some of that away, but not all of it. Don't want it to look, you know, squeaky clean, but obviously don't want to have, you know, dirt caked all over it either. So some of that's going to get cleaned away gently. Let's flip it over and have a look at the inside. Alright, here we are where the magic happens. Again, 1967 super bass. Everything looks correct of the era in here. it would have this tag board cut to size and wired up by hand, as opposed to later turret boards, which were still manufactured by hand, and then printed circuit boards, of course. Now if we look up here at the jacks, at some point someone actually soldered the contacts closed permanently, or semi-permanently anyway, on these top two jacks, with the intention that you would only use, well, these would be the bottom two when it's flipped over, with the intention that you only use these two. And that may or may not be in conjunction with a mod we're going to look at here in a second. Now, if we look down here, we're going to see things that are original and things that are probably not. Right here, this resistor is original, but this cap is not. And not only that, this capacitor has been introduced to a little modification here. Let me back out so you can see it. We have down here, it looks like I can't see the code, it's 47 something or other. It's in parallel with this tropical fish cap, which is an older capacitor, definitely older. And this is all running to, that is, well, let's see here, 8. That's pin 8. So that's the second triode, and it's kind of not been soldered all that well. There's a big blob down there, but we'll tidy that up later. So this add has been modded to try and gain up the amp slightly, as opposed to its stock form. I have not plugged it in yet. I haven't done my evaluation of it audio wise. I wanted to go through this in its received form first. As we go up the board, these input resistors are correct of the period. These gray caps here are correct of the period. You're going to see those a lot in amps of this age. These 100Ks, those look right. This one looks right. This one here is not correct. That's been added or changed out. It would have to be changed out. That's an American-made resistor. This one also has been changed, but a long time ago, from the look of it. Any resistors in here that are this dark chocolate have likely been swapped out, but some of them have been in here a long time. Original. This little, looks like a 1K tucked in there. That thing is original. Original here. This big fat cap is probably original. Yeah, it is. It's an RS, so made in England. So that's original. It's 350 volts. That may end up having to get changed. I don't know. Marching orders on this amp, as with most vintage amps, the owner wants to play it. He wants to be able to enjoy it and plug it in and have it fully functional. He's not a stickler for original parts if those original parts have failed and are no longer doing their job. So those are the marching orders on this particular amp. We're going to do a full troubleshoot on it, and if it needs anything, it will get it. If it doesn't need stuff, if it's functioning fine with what it has, even though my first instinct is to replace this cap, if we charge it up and it's working alright, we're going to leave it in place. It doesn't appear to be leaking physically, but you never know. So now as we head on down the line here, we get into our long-tailed pair. This is your phase inverter. The middle resistor has been changed. This one right here. These two look original. And the feeding resistor to this network there, that's been changed. All of this is original. This cap may have been changed, this 47P here. You don't always see this cap in this position. And the soldering looks a little different from some of the other stuff. It's hard to tell. At this particular period, near as I can tell, they weren't using all of the nail lacquer on things to tell original solder joints. For the most part, it's got so much age and corrosion, it's hard to tell what might be nail lacquer and what's just age. As we go down here, here's your bias supply. Now, this resistor right now is taking the place of what would be a potentiometer to adjust your bias. Someone has decided on this resistor as the correct resistor for that, and we'll see. This resistor, or this cap here, is original, but it's been desoldered from this end, possibly because at one time it may have had an adjustable component. Not sure at this point. Now if we go down to our tube sockets, we'll see that our screen grids have definitely been replaced. You see these big 5-watt salt licks here, which are what I typically use in a situation like this. These are not what this amp would have come with, and were replaced a long time ago. These guys are old. They've been in here, I would say, you know, maybe 25 or 30 years. And they've all 4 been replaced, and they all test good without voltage, so we'll see. Now onto the filter supply. It's my opinion that this this filter cap arrangement is not original. I'm almost certain of it. It's kind of hard to see the brands that are here. If the amp is not humming unreasonably and those caps are still doing their jobs, I'm going to leave them in place for now. And then we come down here to the other side, we can see our rectifiers are right in here. And that's it. Power transformer right there. Wired up properly as you would expect, because the amp does work, and correct to the time. So yeah, that's the inside of this guy. Most of the pots appear to be correct. Obviously this master volume pot was added. That is a post phase, so it probably does sound good. We'll see. I'm not a big fan of master volumes on being added to vintage pieces, but this was done a long time ago and the work was done very well, so you know, no use crying over spilt milk. I'm always of the mind to let an amp be what it is, and that includes adding things like master volumes. You can see this mustard cap here, which actually would have been more prevalent in amps after this one, but not too far after. If somebody replaced all these caps in here, and they very well could have, because the solder joints look like they may have been, because it should have had mustards in it for this era. Kind of spitballing here as I'm looking inside of this thing. I think these are not original. I'm going to have to do some more research. As with most things, you know, there's always more to be learned. I have seen these caps in other Marshalls of this era, but it really should have the mustards like this one here, to my knowledge anyway, which is, it is what it is. Anyway, that's your tour of the inside of this guy, and I'm going to fire it up and do some testing, test the tubes, spend a few hours on it, get it plugged in, make sure everything works, and decide what repairs need to be performed, if any. Hopefully none. That's the hope here, because this is a, you know, it's a historic piece. It's a historic amplifier. Forget that it was owned by Steve Howe of Yes. Forget all of that. It's a historic piece all on its own, but factor in the ownership, and you know, it's fairly important. So we're going to get this one right. All right, stand by. All right, sports fans, I have done all of my testing and tube testing and capacitor charging, etc. It's now about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, several hours later, And I am going to replace all of these components here in the bias supply. Everything's a bit iffy. This thing here, as you can see, is kind of loose anyway. But the bias is not stable, or as stable as I would like, and it definitely needs an adjustable component added. Where this 56K is, we're going to put a resistor and potentiometer in series so that we can control the idle. I only took it up to about 100 volts, and the bias was already a considerable amount higher than I'm comfortable leaving it set. So that's going to be necessary. The tubes we were looking at, by the way, I need to correct myself. One of those tubes was not a Siemens. One of them was actually an Electro-Harmonix. But it's what came with the amp, and they seem to all be functioning well, and it sounds good. So we're going to leave those in place for now, because those are the tubes that came with the amp. But like I said, I'm going to redo this bias supply. It pretty much needs to happen. So we're going to get new caps, we're going to get new diode. All of this arrangement here is going to get replaced. Other than that, everything seems to be working and working well. So once that's completed, the amp is going to stay pretty much how it came. Stay tuned for the result. Okay, here we are with a rebuilt bias supply. As we can see here, I've replaced both of the supply capacitors. I've replaced this bridging resistor, and also this resistor that is in series with a freshly added variable resistor here to set our idle current. I went ahead and left this resistor and the diode in place, and I haven't regretted that. They seem to be doing just fine. So left that stuff in there. Well, you can see let's scoot this up a little bit so you can see the bottom of that. To get a little more light on the subject here. You'll see that that's a 56K, and this is a standard Marshall trim pot 22K, and it's in series with this resistor to ground. So there you go. It's given me what I want. This amp has a whopping 520 volts of B+ voltage in its power supply. You don't often find Marshalls with more than 500 volts over, outside of the major and a few other examples. Usually a Marshall's bias is a fair amount under, or not bias, but B+ rather, is a fair amount under that 500 mark. So, but these are huge transformers. They could probably power at least half again as much wattage as we're talking about. You could probably make this a 150 watt amp without too much worry. After some consulting and a little research, I am given to understand that these gray caps that I thought might be original are likely not all original. They would have had mustards in this amplifier at this age. So you learn something every day. I have seen these caps in vintage Marshalls before, but apparently when you see them, they're not original. And it's especially telling that we've got a mustard up here for the presence control. So more than likely when this amp was new, all of these caps, the coupling caps, tone caps, etc., were mustard caps. So I've already heard this thing, and it sounds exactly as you would expect. Let's plug it in and see what it sounds like for you. All right. How you doing? We got this bad boy all fired up. Once again, This is a 1967 Marshall 100-watt super lead, and I've been having some fun with it. Rebuilt the bias supply, tested all the tubes. The majority of the stuff that's in the amp right now is working all right, so we've left a lot of it in place. There were some things I could have done, but kind of wanted to just keep it as close to found as possible. So did what needed to be done in order to make it stable and reliable. It's got a whopping 525 volts of B+, so there's that. Might want to consider some different power tubes later on down the line with a B+ that hot, but for now, the 34s are sticking it out, so. I'm putting it through that Marshall cab that we looked at earlier with the no-label Celestians on it. Overall, it's a real thick, kind of on the dark side. I've got the treble cranked and the mids cranked, and the presence is at 12 o'clock, I think. And it's still pretty dark and... but it's got it. I mean, there's a swirl going on to everything, and there's a real controllable bark about the sound that's very appealing. I have the master volume all the way up. Just not a fan of master volumes. I don't think I've rarely plugged into one that I thought didn't take away from the sound of the amp or didn't sound better turned all the way up, so. Well, you knew that was going to get played. I don't pretend to know very many Steve Howe licks, and that's not even really a lick, is it? It's more of a riff, but... Yeah, that's one. That's the one I know. I have to practice that one, obviously. Anyway, that's pretty much it. It sounds like a Marshall. It's big and bold and wonderful and a little on the thick side. It's not as bright as an 800 or later models of the amp. It's kind of a little tamer version of the breed, but you put an overdrive pedal in the front of it and it's going to dirty up for you. So that's about it for the 1967 Marshall Super Bass, previously owned by the Mr. Steve Howe from Yes. Had a lot of fun working on it today. I think it sounds beautiful. It should serve its owner well for years to come. If you got any questions about anything we do here at Granville Guitars, seek us out on the web at www.granvilleguitars.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. Until next time, rock on, everyone. You can only rock on if the volume control's up.